You think loyalty guarantees safety, but it can hide a quiet threat. The person who knows your fears can also weaponize your every reaction. When differences appear, you discover whether that closeness protects you or destroys you. Every emotionally dangerous friend begins as a safe space in your mind. You trained yourself to relax around them, to lower all inner defenses. Your tone softens, your doubts quiet, your guard falls without any conscious decision. This is the first invisible contract. Closeness means you stop checking for danger. Dark psychology studies that exact gap between trust and awareness. Manipulation does not start when someone attacks you, it starts when you stop observing. A trusted friend becomes powerful because you assume their intention is always pure. Once intention is assumed, behavior stops getting questioned and control quietly starts building. Machiavelli is often interpreted as warning that if you ignore power games, you lose to those who study them. In close friendships, power games look nothing like politics, they look like emotional habits. A sigh here, a delayed reply there, a mocking comment disguised as humor. You never notice the pattern at first, you only feel vague discomfort inside. The most dangerous phase begins when differences appear between you and that friend. Maybe you grow in a new direction, maybe you change a belief, maybe you refuse something. The change itself is not the threat is what it triggers. Inside them, a silent calculation starts, protect the bond or protect the ego. If their ego is fragile, your difference feels like a personal attack. They do not ask why you changed, they ask why you betrayed the old pattern. The friendship was never built on mutual growth, it was built on predictability. You were allowed closeness only as long as you stayed emotionally familiar and controllable. This is where subtle emotional draining begins to show itself more clearly. Notice how conversations start circling around your mistakes and their sacrifices. Notice how your opinions are treated as phases, while their opinions feel non-negotiable. You walk away from discussions feeling guilty, confused, and strangely smaller than before. Albert Bandura would explain it simply: if a behavior is rewarded, it repeats. When your friend uses guilt and you surrender, that behavior gets rewarded inside their mind. When they use silence and you chase them, that behavior also gets rewarded deeply. Slowly, their nervous system learns a rule: emotional pressure works perfectly on you. The dangerous part is that they might not see themselves as manipulators. They see themselves as right, honest, maybe even caring, just hurt by your difference. Yet their unconscious goal becomes simple: bring you back to the version they control. They may use three classic tools: fear, guilt, and isolation. Fear appears in small warnings about what you might lose without them. They hint that others will not tolerate your change, but they tolerated everything. They remind you who stayed when you were weak and who might leave now. Your nervous system hears a message: difference means abandonment, similarity means safety. Guilt appears in emotional scorekeeping. Every argument pulls out an old emotional receipt. They remember every favor, every support, every moment they stood beside you. They link your current choice with those past moments, as if you owe obedience. You start believing that protecting your boundaries means you are ungrateful and cruel. Isolation appears when they quietly reshape how others see you. They may share your changes with a subtle twist, just enough to raise doubts. They might call you too sensitive, too dramatic, too unstable, but always with concern. Suddenly, you feel misunderstood by people who never heard your side clearly. You never notice this, but the closest friend holds the deepest emotional map. They know which memories soften you, which fears freeze you, which compliments revive you. In conflict, that map can become a healing gift or a silent weapon. If their inner security is weak, they use that map to win, not to understand. This is why your most dangerous enemy can wear the mask of shared history. They do not need open attacks, they only need to control how you feel. They can drain you without shouting, simply by pulling invisible strings you once handed them. You feel tired after every interaction, but you keep defending them to yourself. You tell yourself they are just stressed, just emotional, just misunderstood, nothing truly harmful. That self-defense of the bond is the final trap. You protect the cage. Your mind chooses loyalty over clarity, because clarity would break your entire inner story. So you stay drained and confused, wondering why your confidence keeps shrinking around them. The real danger is not that differences arise. Differences are normal and healthy. The real danger is this quiet question. Will you notice when a friend starts using those differences as tools against your mind? You think you can detect emotional danger instantly, but the mind is slow with familiarity. You believe a close bond protects you from psychological traps, yet it removes your caution. When pressure rises, you rarely see the first sign because you trust the source too much. Closeness creates comfort, and comfort creates blindness. This blindness is not emotional weakness, it is a learned reflex. Your brain saves energy by trusting familiar people instead of analyzing them. This is the exact psychological doorway manipulators use without ever planning it consciously. The second phase of hidden damage begins when you express a different view. Not rebellion, not disrespect, just a simple difference. This difference threatens the silent emotional contract they believe you signed years ago. The contract says you must stay predictable, agreeable, and aligned with their expectations. Dark psychology calls this expectation an internal template. Every manipulative friend holds a specific psychological version of you inside their mind. When your new actions do not match that version, they feel destabilized. Stability for them does not come from mutual growth, but from your emotional familiarity. This is where the psychological twist begins. They do not adjust their template to your growth. They try to force your growth back into their template. This is influence disguised as concern, control disguised as emotional closeness. Machiavelli once said that people defend their expectations more fiercely than their reality. Your difference challenges their expectation of you, so you become the new target. They do not attack your beliefs, they attack your shift, your change, your independence. They question why you cannot stay the version they were comfortable controlling. The shift from friend to emotional opponent is almost silent. It happens through tone changes, invisible pauses, and strategic vulnerability. They act hurt to make you retreat, not to express their truth. They use emotional withdrawal to create panic inside you. This withdrawal is not direct hostility. It is subtle, slow, and calculated by instinct, not strategy. They know you hate losing connection, so they weaponize distance. Suddenly you feel responsible for restoring harmony, even when you did nothing wrong. This is emotional inversion. The person who caused the tension behaves like the victim. The person who tried communicating becomes the guilty one. You apologize for the imbalance they created to control you. Your brain receives a dangerous message. Peace depends on your surrender. This message shapes your next reaction, and the next and the next. Slowly you lose your natural responses and adopt controlled reactions. The manipulation becomes internal, automatic, and unnoticed. The most dangerous trait of a draining friend is their selective memory. They forget your support, but remember your smallest disagreement. They forget your loyalty, but highlight your rare frustration. Their memory turns differences into personal betrayals, not normal human variation. Albert Bandura once said that behavior is shaped by consequences. If they express hurt and you rush to fix it, they learn that guilt works. If they show anger and you soften your stance, they learn that pressure works. Your attempts to maintain peace teach them the blueprint of controlling you. This blueprint grows stronger with every emotional repetition. After a few cycles, they know exactly which sentences weaken you. They know which emotional triggers silence you instantly. They know which tone changes make you feel responsible for their reactions. Yet the most unsettling truth is this: they may not see their behavior as manipulation. They tell themselves they are defending the friendship. They tell themselves they are right and you are drifting. They believe that bringing you back proves how much they care. This self-deception makes them even more dangerous. A manipulator who knows they are manipulating can sometimes stop. A manipulator who thinks they are righteous never stops, because they believe they are saving the bond. Their control feels justified, their pressure feels necessary, their guilt feels moral. You never notice this, but emotional pressure from a close friend is not loud. It is soft, patient, and wrapped in familiar language. They say they worry, they say they miss the old you, they say they feel replaced. These words sound emotional, but carry strategic psychological weight. You start adjusting your choices to maintain their comfort. You silence your opinions because they trigger tension. You avoid certain topics because they create emotional storms. You shrink your growth to keep the peace you never chose. This shrinking becomes your new normal. It feels small at first, then becomes a part of your identity. You question yourself more, you explain yourself more, you defend yourself more. Your voice becomes hesitant around someone who once felt like home. The emotional drain builds gradually. You feel tired after conversations, but cannot explain why. You feel guilty for standing your ground, even when you are right. You feel scared of conflict with someone you once trusted deeply. The internal conflict becomes psychological noise. You replay conversations endlessly, searching for mistakes you never made. You modify your behavior to avoid reactions that should not exist in the first place. You become emotionally conditioned by fear of disappointing them. This is the hidden system of control. They do not need threats, they only need your emotional sensitivity. They do not need dominance, they only need your desire to protect the bond. Your strength becomes their tool, your empathy becomes their weapon. The pattern intensifies when they begin testing your boundaries more often. They ask for more availability, more emotional validation, more agreement. They expect you to put them above your growth, your goals, and your peace. Your boundaries become the enemy in their story. You never notice this, but manipulators disguise entitlement as emotional connection. They expect you to adjust because they believe you always will. They rely on your fear of losing them to keep the power dynamic stable. Your discomfort becomes their comfort, and your silence becomes their victory. The deeper danger begins when they start controlling the narrative. They shift conversations in ways that make you question your own behavior. They act as if your changes are harmful, irresponsible, or disrespectful. They shape your identity in their words until you doubt your own truth. Identity erosion begins with small corrections, small judgments, small remarks. They slowly define who you are allowed to be, emotionally and mentally. You begin seeing yourself through their biased lens. The trap becomes invisible because the narrative feels familiar and emotional. The cliffhanger rests in one unresolved truth. What happens when the version of you they want and the version of you you need to become can no longer fit inside the same friendship? You think you can keep your inner world untouched, but familiar voices shape it quietly. You believe you choose your reactions freely, yet old emotional bonds rewrite your choices. When pressure comes from someone you trust, the mind obeys before it understands. The next layer of danger emerges through something subtle, emotional conditioning. Conditioning does not feel like control, it feels like responsibility. Your draining friend teaches you a rule without speaking it. Their comfort matters more than your boundaries. Once this rule settles inside you, your behavior starts serving their emotions before serving your truth. Dark psychology describes this as behavioral reshaping through emotional consequence. You learn which reactions bring peace, so you repeat them. You learn which reactions bring conflict, so you avoid them. Your nervous system becomes trained to prioritize their approval. This training is not dramatic, it is microscopic. A concerned tone here, a disappointed sigh there, a strategic silence used at the right moment. Each micro-signal shapes your internal response, without any direct instruction. You start feeling unsafe, giving honest opinions around them. The real twist is that emotional conditioning becomes stronger when differences arise. Your change activates their insecurity activates their control. They begin using emotional pressure more often because it works on you. You slowly become the only one adjusting in the relationship. Machiavelli once suggested that people protect their emotional authority more than their morality. Your draining friend does exactly that. They protect their influence over you. They cannot tolerate losing that influence because it validates their identity. So they reshape your reality to keep your mind aligned with their comfort. The reshaping happens through 5 psychological distortions. These distortions appear harmless, but each one is a tool of control disguised as concern. First distortion, exaggerated victimhood. They present themselves as deeply hurt whenever you express difference. They say they feel abandoned, misunderstood, or pushed away by your change. Your mind translates their reaction as a warning: do not upset them again. Second distortion, moral superiority. They act as if their view is more balanced, mature, and correct than yours. They use calm words but heavy implications, suggesting your choices are impulsive. You start doubting your judgment because they position themselves as wiser. Third distortion, selective empathy. They offer empathy when you are weak, but withdraw it when you show independence. You receive comfort only when you fall back into the role they understand. Emotional support becomes a reward, not a bond. Fourth distortion, emotional reframing. They reinterpret your words in the most guilt-inducing way possible. Your boundary becomes coldness, your clarity becomes aggression, your difference becomes betrayal. Their reframing makes you defend yourself instead of defending your truth. Fifth distortion, reality minimization. They downplay your achievements, your growth, and your new perspective. They imply that your evolution is temporary or unnecessary. Their goal is to shrink your progress until it fits their comfort zone. These distortions are not random, they form an interconnected system. Each distortion reinforces the next, creating a loop you rarely escape. Your growing discomfort becomes evidence for them that you are changing for the worse. You are judged not for your behavior, but for your evolution. This system works because you once shared deep emotional history. They know how to trigger guilt, how to trigger fear, how to trigger self-doubt. You unconsciously revert to old patterns around them, even when those patterns harm you. The past becomes a psychological leash wrapped around your present. Albert Bandura once explained that environments shape behavior more powerfully than intentions. Your draining friend becomes an environment, not just a person. Their reactions shape your responses, their emotions shape your priorities. You are conditioned without ever realizing what is happening. You never notice this, but emotional dependence does not start when you admire someone. It starts when you fear disappointing them. Fear of disappointment becomes the new chain, more powerful than affection. You obey not because they deserve it, but because you fear the emotional cost of disobedience. This fear creates internal conflict. You know something feels wrong, yet you feel guilty for questioning it. You sense the imbalance, yet you justify the pressure. You cling to the bond, because losing it feels heavier than losing your peace. The bond becomes a psychological paradox. You stay because you care, but caring is used against you. You silence yourself to avoid hurting them, but the silence hurts you instead. Your identity slowly bends until it no longer feels like yours. The next stage of danger begins when they start controlling your emotional rhythm. They choose when you feel comfort, when you feel guilt, when you feel fear. Their approval becomes relief, their disappointment becomes punishment. Your emotional landscape begins revolving around their reactions. This is not friendship, this is emotional centralization. One person becomes the center of your emotional world, and you orbit around them. You lose balance, you lose clarity, you lose your internal authority. Your decisions start protecting them more than protecting yourself. And then comes the darkest shift of all. When differences deepen, they begin influencing how you view yourself. Not your choices, but your identity. They slowly shape a version of you that is easier for them to handle. The cliffhanger lies in the next silent transformation. What happens when the identity they build for you becomes stronger than the identity you build for yourself? You think your identity is stable, but familiar influence can rewrite it silently. You believe you know who you are, yet emotional pressure reshapes your self-image slowly. When someone close controls the rhythm of your feelings, they begin controlling your sense of self. The next psychological layer is identity erosion. This erosion is not loud, it is gradual and disguised within emotional closeness. Your draining friend does not attack your identity directly. They weaken it with subtle corrections. These corrections sound like advice, but function like quiet restraints on your growth. Identity erosion begins with repeated emotional feedback. They tell you what you used to be, what you should be, what you have become. Each statement clashes with your evolving self, causing internal confusion. You start relying on their perception of you more than your own perception. Dark psychology explains that identity becomes vulnerable when external validation becomes necessary. You seek their approval because conflict drains you. You seek their praise because guilt exhausts you. Slowly, you start seeing yourself through their biased emotional lens. Their lens always favors the version of you that benefits them. The version that agrees more, adapts more, explains more, tolerates more. This version is emotionally predictable, mentally manageable, and easy to influence. Your authentic self becomes secondary to the self they prefer. Machiavelli once suggested that people reshape others not to understand them, but to use them. Your draining friend might not be conscious of this, but their patterns show the same logic. They reshape your self-image until your growth threatens neither their ego nor their control. Your identity becomes a negotiation. They believe they have the right to win. You never notice this, but identity erosion hides behind three emotional tactics. First tactic, constant comparison with your past self. They say you changed too much, implying your new version is flawed or dangerous. They use nostalgia to pull you back into old behaviors that served them better. Your evolution becomes a problem, not progress. Second tactic, emotional labeling. They label your boundaries as coldness, your clarity as arrogance, your independence as distance. These labels become psychological stains you try to wash off by pleasing them more. Your authentic reactions start feeling like mistakes. Third tactic, credibility shifting. They question your reasoning, your memory, or your emotional awareness. They present their interpretation as more balanced or realistic than yours. You begin trusting their view of events more than your own. These three tactics weaken your internal authority. Once you stop trusting your intuition, you become dependent on their emotional interpretations. Dependence allows control, and control allows selective truth. Their truth becomes your reality, even when it hurts you. Albert Bandura once explained that identity forms through consistent emotional reinforcement. Your draining friend reinforces the traits that benefit them. They reward compliance, they punish independence. You reshape yourself to maintain emotional stability. This reshaping becomes your silent prison. You shrink certain thoughts because they trigger arguments. You hide certain changes because they trigger guilt. You suppress certain feelings because they trigger withdrawal. You stop being fully yourself around them, and you do not even realize it. You become cautious, filtered, moderated, edited. Your inner voice grows quieter as their voice grows louder inside your mind. You begin living in an emotional landscape they built. The next twist appears when they start controlling not what you feel, but what you believe. They influence your opinions subtly, making you align with their worldview to avoid conflict. You agree more often, not because they are right, but because it is easier. Comfort becomes more important than authenticity. And then comes the most dangerous shift, internal compliance. Internal compliance is when you change your thoughts before conflict even happens. You stop expressing difference because you already expect their reaction. They no longer need to pressure you, your mind pressures itself. This is how influence becomes self-sustaining. They exert less and less effort, while you exert more and more restraint. You start believing that their emotional stability is your responsibility. Your identity bends to accommodate that belief. The erosion deepens when your achievements start making them uncomfortable. Growth threatens insecure people because it highlights their stagnation. So they minimize your progress, question your direction, or mock your goals gently. You downplay your success so they feel safer. You never noticed this, but emotional draining friends fear your evolution more than your mistakes. Mistakes keep you close, growth pulls you away. So they encourage your weakness and discourage your strength. They need you small to feel big. Your identity becomes a battlefield between who you are becoming and who they need you to be. Every time you evolve, they create emotional friction to pull you back. Every time you gain clarity, they trigger guilt to blur your vision. Every time you take control, they act wounded to regain influence. Beneath all this manipulation lies one silent truth. They are not fighting you, they are fighting your independence. Your independence threatens the power they built unconsciously. Your difference threatens the emotional world they rely on. The cliffhanger asks the question most people avoid. What happens when they no longer protect the friendship, but start protecting the power they hold over your mind? You think power is always loud, but the quietest control hides inside emotions. You believe conflict shows who is dangerous, but silence often reveals the real threat. When someone close protects their power over you, the danger becomes almost invisible. The next stage is psychological power preservation. This preservation begins when your draining friend senses they are losing influence. They feel your independence as a personal attack, even when you act respectfully. Their goal shifts from connection to control, from friendship to dominance. Dark psychology explains that insecure individuals defend emotional power with three instincts. First, reclaim control through emotional imbalance. Second, protect their ego by rewriting events. Third, maintain superiority by weakening your confidence. Each instinct grows stronger when differences arise. The first instinct activates through emotional imbalance. They start using unpredictable reactions to destabilize your certainty. One moment they are affectionate, the next moment cold and distant. This unpredictability forces your mind into hyper-awareness. Hyper-awareness makes you analyze every word you speak. You monitor every tone, every sentence, every small shift. Your brain begins scanning their emotions constantly, trying to avoid triggering them. You become emotionally exhausted, while they become emotionally powerful. Machiavelli once suggested that controlling uncertainty keeps people dependent. Your draining friend creates uncertainty because it keeps you emotionally occupied. When you cannot predict their behavior, you lose your own stability. Your focus shifts from your growth to their mood. The second instinct emerges as narrative rewriting. Narrative rewriting is when they reshape past events to protect their ego. They deny their hurtful actions, exaggerate your reactions, and distort the truth. Their rewritten narrative always paints them as balanced and you as unstable. You begin questioning your own memory. You wonder if you overreacted, misunderstood, or misjudged. Their conviction makes your doubt grow even stronger. You start accepting their version of events because self-doubt weakens your clarity. Albert Bandura once explained that repeated narratives reshape personal perception. He believed that people internalize the stories they hear most often. Your draining friend knows this instinctively, not intellectually. They repeat stories that weaken you and strengthen their emotional authority. The third instinct is subtle superiority. Superiority does not appear through insults, it appears through emotional hierarchy. They behave as if their feelings are more important than yours. They behave as if their discomfort outweighs your growth. You begin adjusting to their pain more than your needs. You make your decisions softer, safer, smaller to avoid conflict. You become emotionally careful, and they become emotionally privileged. This privilege gives them unconscious dominance in the friendship. As these three instincts strengthen, the power dynamic shifts entirely. You become the stabilizer, they become the disruptor. You become the apologizer, they become the judge. You become the one who tries, they become the one who demands. This imbalance creates silent psychological consequences. First consequence, loss of emotional independence. You stop trusting your own reactions and rely on their interpretation instead. Your emotions become regulated by their approval or disappointment. Second consequence, constant self-monitoring. You replay conversations long after they end. You worry about saying the wrong thing, triggering the wrong reaction. Your emotional energy drains into maintaining harmony they keep breaking. Third consequence, shrinking personal boundaries. You stop expressing your real thoughts because they create tension. You avoid disagreements because they lead to emotional punishment. You lose your natural assertiveness to protect their fragile ego. Fourth consequence, internalized self-doubt. Their criticism becomes your inner voice. Their judgments become your beliefs about yourself. Their disappointment becomes a fear you carry everywhere. You never notice this, but their emotional patterns begin living inside you. Even when they are not around, you hear their reactions in your mind. This is the deepest form of psychological influence, internalized control. Control that does not require their presence, only their history with you. The more you try to maintain peace, the more power they gain. Your silence becomes their advantage, your empathy becomes their tool. The friendship turns into a mental battlefield you keep losing without realizing. You start feeling trapped but cannot explain why. And then comes the darkest stage, emotional retaliation. Retaliation appears when your growth becomes too visible, too undeniable. When you finally set boundaries, even gently, they feel threatened. Threatened people react, not with logic but with psychological defense. This defense usually takes three forms. First, guilt flooding, overwhelming you with emotional blame. Second, alliance building, subtly influencing others against you. Third, value reversing, attacking the qualities they once praised. Guilt flooding forces you to question your right to set limits. Alliance building makes you feel isolated without them saying a word. Value reversing makes you feel less worthy at the moment you need confidence most. Their actions are not logical, they are protective. They are protecting the emotional world where they feel superior. Your independence threatens that world, so they fight it. Their fight is not against your behavior, it is against your evolution. The cliffhanger now exposes the core danger. What happens when someone who knows your fears, your triggers, and your emotional patterns decides to use all of that against you, just to keep their psychological power alive? You think people break you with actions, but the deepest damage comes from emotional patterns. You believe you can handle conflict, but hidden psychological warfare never looks like conflict. When someone close begins using your fears against you, the danger becomes internal, not external. The final stage is psychological inversion. This inversion flips your reality so quietly that you do not notice the shift. Your draining friend turns themselves into the victim and turns you into the threat. Every healthy boundary becomes an attack in their narrative. Dark psychology explains inversion as a defensive mechanism used by insecure minds. When they fear losing control, they reshape the story to protect their ego and power. You become the unpredictable one, the distant one, the changed one, the problematic one. Their goal is simple: regain influence by redefining your identity. This redefinition follows a clear emotional strategy. First, they highlight your flaws more than your progress. Second, they frame your boundaries as cruelty. Third, they portray themselves as the only one who understands your real self. The psychological trap closes without you realizing. Machiavelli once suggested that people defend their self-image more fiercely than truth. Your draining friend defends the image of themselves as the stable, loyal, and misunderstood one. Admitting their manipulation would shatter their identity, so they double down instead. They protect their ego even if it means destroying the bond. You begin questioning everything about yourself. Whether your boundaries are too harsh, whether your growth is too fast, whether your clarity is too cold. Your self-doubt becomes their strongest anchor inside you. Albert Bandura once explained that repeated emotional pressure shapes belief more than evidence. When someone close repeats the same narrative, your mind absorbs it unconsciously. You start believing their distortions because emotional repetition overrides logic. Your inner voice becomes an echo of their criticism. The final transformation occurs when you start defending them more than yourself. You justify their behavior to others. You excuse their pressure. You protect their reputation over your well-being. Your loyalty becomes the final chain they rely on. Loyalty hides danger because it silences your awareness. You tolerate more than you should. You forgive faster than you understand. You stay longer than your peace allows. But deep inside, a psychological tension grows. A quiet voice whispers that something is wrong. This whisper is your intuition trying to break through conditioning. Your body senses the danger before your mind admits it. This inner conflict builds until one moment of clarity arrives. It can appear in a conversation, a silence, a memory, or an unexpected realization. The clarity hits like truth finally breathing. You recognize the pattern not as a misunderstanding, but as emotional control. Recognition is the first step of liberation. You begin noticing their tone shifts without absorbing the guilt. You begin noticing their narratives without accepting their distortions. You begin noticing their insecurity without sacrificing your growth. The psychological inversion loses power when you stop reacting emotionally. You stop explaining yourself excessively. You stop apologizing for your boundaries. You stop shrinking yourself to maintain harmony. Your identity begins returning to you. Your voice becomes stronger. Your perspective becomes clearer. Your emotional balance becomes self-directed again. And that is when the truth reveals itself. Your closest friend was never dangerous because of who they were. They became dangerous because of how much access you gave them to your inner world. The deeper the access, the deeper the influence. This final understanding reshapes the entire journey. It teaches you that closeness without boundaries becomes a risk. It teaches you that emotional loyalty must be balanced with self-protection. It teaches you that difference does not create enemies, insecurity does. The story ends with one silent but powerful realization. The real threat was never your difference. The real threat was their fear of losing control over you. Your evolution exposed their insecurity, and their insecurity exposed their hidden manipulation. And now the cliffhanger question that every viewer must confront. If someone close began shaping your emotions, your reactions, and your identity without you noticing, would you have the courage to reclaim yourself, even if it means walking away from the bond you once trusted the most?